Today, I want to take a closer look at three popular semiconductor stocks, AMD, Intel, and Nvidia, and take a closer look at recent updates. All three companies had something big happen this week. We saw Nvidia report earnings, we saw Intel report their foundry event, and we had AMD at an investor conference event as well, where they shared a lot of great information. So, we're going to take a closer look at each of these individual companies and some of the highlights throughout the week. If this is your first time here, my name is Jose Najarro, and I spend way too much time reading about semiconductor and AI. But thanks to that, my education and work experience, I do believe I have created the #1 semiconductor podcast for investors. So let's get started.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video, and check out fool.com/Jose for the 10 best stocks to buy now. With that link, you get a promotional offer for the subscription service. Now, let's continue with today's episode.
All right, so let's start off with AMD. On February 20th, the day before Nvidia earnings, the company did present at an investor event. So the first thing the company talked about was the AI market, that they believe, hey, look, this is still going to be a $400 billion market size by 2027. This is mainly going to be driven by GPUs and forms of accelerators, and that AMD will continue to win with the MI300, and they do expect greater than $3.5 billion in revenue in 2024 from their GPU product. And they are currently tracking on that growth rate right now. Now, the second thing they talked about was, I want to say, a big warning to NVIDIA to some extent, if you believe them. But they talked how the AI market right now has no checks and balance. And this no checks and balance has allowed NVIDIA to be the sole player in the space and allowed to have very high margins in the market, which is unsustainable to some extent, especially if you have kind of a competitive market. And AMD mentions that, hey, look, they have brought competition and they will bring checks and balance to the overall AI chip market, which can be seen as a negative sense to NVIDIA. Some investors might say, hey, look, not too much worry about NVIDIA's margins, especially if NVIDIA is doing $20 billion plus in data center per quarter, while AMD is only doing 3.5 a year. So how can you really do any checks and balance if you don't really have much of a product to showcase out there? And before we take a closer look at some more AMD thoughts, I do want to say thank you guys for the support. We're so close to hitting 37,000, so make sure to hit the thumbs up, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you want to support the channel a little bit more, make sure to subscribe using my link at fool.com/Jose. The final thing I want to take a closer look at, and this is a future episode idea. There was a question of, hey, look, how are custom AI chips, and should semiconductor companies be worried about both big tech players developing their own chips and startups developing their own chips, or startups developing competitive chips? Their CTO actually mentioned some great points. First, let's take a closer look at internal chips made by big tech. And they mentioned that, hey, look, big tech actually creating their own chips, it makes perfect sense. When big tech has a piece of an algorithm and an application that they're running well defined, and they are the absolute expert of the application, they can control the parameters around it. That makes sense to create a more tailored solution. So we can see ASIC solutions, which are these overall chips, are really good when you have that algorithm, right? Because they are good for that one solution. But when you need high programmability to some extent, you need programmable devices. And that's when you need FPGAs, CPUs, and GPUs. Now, the second question there is, are startups a threat to companies like Nvidia and AMD? And AMD reminded investors that, hey, look, the hardest thing for a startup today is if you haven't earned the trust of the leaders in the industry, you're not understanding where the new algorithms are going. You're not understanding where the new demands are, where they need flexibility and programmability. And because that change is occurring so quickly, the GPU market has the highest barrier entry possible, right? Because the workloads that you're developing on right now is not going to be the workload you're developing in the future. And big tech leaders don't share that secret to anybody. That's why right now, when we kind of see a lot of popular chips, they're usually only good for one workload. But what happens when that workload becomes obsolete? So AMD mentions that, hey, look, there's definitely a lot of excitement with startups, but at the end of the day, this is a very, very heavy moat market. So I think that was a good understanding for both AMD and Nvidia solutions. Now, I want to take a closer look at Intel. On February 21st, the same day as Nvidia's earnings, they had their foundry event where they showcased a lot of excitement for their overall foundry endeavors, and we're going to talk a closer look at that. But the first thing they did was they introduced a new advisory committee for their foundry market and for their foundry business. And I do want to say the advisors here are pretty great in my opinion. They have, for example, the co-CEO of Synopsys. They have the former CEO of Cadence. They have the former CEO of Siemens. And all those three companies that I just discussed are ones that are pretty much in the foundry business in forms of the design process. So I do believe if there's anybody to really help out the foundry are these companies, because these are the ones that happened before the foundry segment. So I think that this was a good call, and I really like to see all these CEO members in this overall advisory board. Now, if we take a closer look at some of the great things that they talked about during their events, they highlighted two main things. And the first thing is we can see here their foundry process map. They did announce their next generation after 18A. So after 18A, their 5 nodes in 4 years is complete, but they're going to go with 14A somewhere in 2027. So we can see it's definitely going to take some time here. They do believe by 2024, they're going to be done with 18A to some extent. Now, what they also did announce is previously we only had like Intel 4, Intel 3, Intel 28, Intel 18A, but they are also releasing kind of new generations. Intel 3 will now also have Intel 3T, which is going to deal with some form of advanced packaging. We're also going to have Intel 3E, Intel 3PT, and then we're going to have Intel AP. So each of these are going to be used for different types of solutions, for different types of market needs, and different types of advanced packaging solutions as well. So the final news here that I have from their Intel Foundry event is Microsoft has chosen a chip design, and it plans to produce on Intel's 18A for what I believe is going to be a very strong AI chip to some extent. Obviously, we just talked about ASIC solution and big tech players kind of creating their own AI chips. We can see Microsoft is doing that pretty well. They just recently announced the Maya and the Cobalt, and I believe another chip, and this is most likely going to be the next generation of that chip. So overall, Intel has now lifetime deals greater than $15 billion for their foundry market, and that bodes really well. As in their last earnings, I do believe it was $10 billion. Oh, I actually do have one more Intel news, but it doesn't have to do with their foundry business. On February 20th, Intel and Ohio are doubling up their AI process with new high-performance computing cluster. So this obviously bodes well because it's going to be using Intel's CPU solutions, which is going to have roughly 756 Max series CPUs. But luckily, if you are an Nvidia investor, it's going to come with plenty and plenty of H100s, plenty of NVLink connections, and all their networking solutions that Nvidia provides. So a big win. We continue to see high performance computing and AI solutions continue to be big wins for the CPU and also the GPU market. In my opinion, is mainly on the GPU side right now. Now, if we take a closer look at Nvidia did report earnings on February 21st that overall demolished earnings. Pretty much data center continues to win. Supply chains are getting better, so they're going to be able to ship more chips. And at the end of the day, even though supply chains are getting better, they still believe that they're going to be supply constrained this year, and they expect to have nice growth in 2024 and 2025 as well. Outside of that, the Chinese market is now a very small portion of this company's total revenue. So now I don't believe the Chinese market is no longer a headwind. I do believe now is going to be a future tailwind for the upcoming quarters when they start to release new chips to the China market, which I do believe we're going to start seeing in Q2 and Q3 of this year. Outside of that, on February 21st, Nvidia and Google kind of partnered up. Google did announce an open source large language model. Nvidia came out right there the same day and said that, hey, look, this open source model is optimized to run on our consumer GPUs, which bodes really well for obviously NVIDIA's consumer market. Now, if you are a big fan of NVIDIA, we are going to have two big NVIDIA events on March 4th and March 5th. March 4th, we're going to focus about the technology, media, and telecom market. And March 5th, we're going to focus on the healthcare market, where I do believe will be a very big portion of this company's revenue in the next 2 to 3 years. So overall, stay excited. Make sure to stay tuned to the episode and make sure to stay tuned to this channel. Take care, have a good day, and see you next time.